Hello again, students. So we're going to continue on with our lecture series. The last 3 chapters you've read, they kind of recover multiple issues, and so trying to do videos on them would just be me rehashing over and over again. So often just reading through the information is beneficial, but since we're going to be moving more into talking about the progressives and also into war chapters and other societal changes, it's a good time for me to get back into doing full-on lectures for you on each week. So we're going to talk today about the progressive movement, and this is fundamentally important to understanding how we've gotten to America in its current form. The progressives were deeply idealistic. They wanted to change society and how the country was, and you're going to see greater government intervention into society itself, into the economy, into all facets of American life. So this is going to change a lot of things. We're going to go ahead and we're going to look at some of them today. There's a few key things that are going to kickstart the progressive era, and then there's going to be some key points in it. First and foremost, what started a lot of these movements? Well, women had been striving to vote for a little over 50 years in earnest is when they made these pushes. So starting about 1860, 1870, you're going to have women start to organize. They're going to start going to meetings. They're going to hold large-scale gatherings. In the West, women access the ballot box quite a bit sooner. In Utah and Wyoming, they're already voting out in those regions. So other women throughout the country see this and believe that they also deserve the same rights. Furthermore, since African Americans have earned the right to vote, women are kind of on the last area, or the last group that still do not have access to the franchise. Also, the cities themselves are in turmoil. They're filthy. They are full of disease. For the most part, they're unsafe in many others. Large fires frequently ravage throughout large cities. People are dying in factories. People are just dying from foodborne illnesses. So sanitation and things that impact not just the poor inside the city, but also impact the more well-to-do in the cities is becoming an epidemic too. You're going to see people who want to fix social inequality issues. These are people that are going to not just simply look at class when it comes to, and race when it comes to who they are willing to help, but they are willing to open up and try to assist everybody and try to bring greater equality to all people. We're not going to really talk about eugenics at the moment, but some of the people that are high on the end of the progressive movement, many of them did believe in eugenics up until about World War II. Other things that they were trying to fix also was ending reliance upon alcohol, which was a growing and continuous problem within the United States. And the other thing too is because of the corruption in the cities that we were witness to throughout the 1870s and 90s, you were going to see them try to fix and reform those methods of how voting occurs and how city and state and federal government all functions. So let's first talk about the muckrakers. The muckrakers themselves, sorry, I'm going to move myself over here a little bit. The muckrakers themselves, they are what we would look at as our initial investigative reporters. So these would be people that would actually go out. They would go to where their story was at. They would interview people. Sometimes they would go undercover, but they would be out there to try to find problems and issues that would be plaguing the United States at the time. They will use every medium for this too. So some areas they'll be writers. Some of them will take photographs. We'll eventually, as we get further on, you're going to start seeing the use of film, but not until much later. But these people, they are looking for problems in society, and they're trying to document them and then bring greater public awareness of it. That is the biggest thing about it, is they believe that in order to fix these problems, it's better for the public to get involved because their voice might not be loud enough, or they may not be influential enough to shape things on a political level. Great social outrage and outrage by a population often brings quicker change than just simply one person raising the flag about it and then yelling about it, okay? Some of the other things that they were going after, there's a lot, of course, public corruption. So this is kind of what brought down Boss Tweed when we were reading about him, is that there was investigative journalism that showed his corruption and how much his ring was stealing from people. Also, for those who may not be in some of the worst and most slum-ridden areas of the cities, they may not know quite how bad it had gotten and how many people were dying from easily correctable sanitation situations. Of all the people, too, who is a major progressive throughout the era, Teddy Roosevelt, he did not like a lot of the muckrakers. In fact, he is the one who created the term muckraker. His true belief was that these people were just in it for sensationalism, that they delighted in just discussing misery and horribleness that is going on throughout the cities. Looking at the notable ones, you're going to have Jacob Riis. He is most known for How the Other Half Lives, really bringing awareness to what poverty looked like in inner city America. He did this mainly through photography. That was his main medium, but of course he was a writer too. But he would take pictures of like the slums. He was famous for going to where child labor was happening and taking pictures of these children in these mines and sweatshops. But the use of photographs overall, like when I've talked to people before, explaining something is different from showing something to someone. While you may be able to express quite a bit of information in words, sometimes a single picture is more impactful. And that's something we've learned in history, how photography has shifted the shape of how humans view certain events. For example, war was often seen as something from afar. Most of the exposure you might have to depiction of war would be in a glorious painting of a battle scene, and then you have the Civil War start, where you have photographers out there taking pictures of men lying dead in fields at the end of the war, which really brought a more human side to what war really looked like. Ida Tarbell is another real famous muckraker. She's the one who really attacks the idea of monopolies. Her punching bag was Rockefeller. She had a distinct bias because her father's oil company had been crushed by Rockefellers, so she did kind of attack the monopoly structure with a personal vengeance. If you guys remember Whole House from your previous readings, she promoted, these humanitarian efforts inside the inner cities. And if you're not aware what a suffragette is, those are women that are advocating for votes. Upton Sinclair, he's probably the best known still to this day, aside from probably Jacob Riis. Jacob Riis is still poignant because of his photography, but Upton Sinclair, many times throughout a lot of young education, even when I was going into school, we would read his most famous work, which is The Jungle. Upton Sinclair initially wrote it because he thought it might bring on a socialist revolution, but instead it was more just a muckraker article that really brought home the disgusting nature of the meat industry in the United States. For the most part, it is written as a fictional account, but he did do numerous interviews, and many of the people who worked in the meat factories at the processing centers agreed with his assessment and how he showed or demonstrated what the meat industry really looked like. When we talk about this, we focus in on thoughts of, we know how meat is today. We know how we keep it refrigerated, how we preserve it, how we protect it. He brought to light that sometimes you'd be working in like these Chicago slaughterhouses and you'd get 100 degrees outside and there's no refrigeration, so meat is being stored inside these sheds. So they're not kept cool. The meat is going foul because of it. They talk about they would open up the door and a wall of flies would literally come flying out into people's faces. The walls would be coated black with them. There'd be maggots in the meat that they would just cut slivers off of. He talks about how they processed sausages with just pretty much anything that was lying around, to the point it was so disgusting to Theodore Roosevelt that he demanded immediate reform as to how the meat processing was going on in the United States. It brought it closer to home for Americans to understand that their food that they were eating might not be safe. And if their food's not safe, then that's one of the reasons why they're getting sick. And this would push forward greater reforms where you finally have government intervention and the government taking an active role in doing true inspections. But later on, his other work, of course, is like labor conditions and political corruption. He's a socialist wishing for socialist revolution. He wants to bring home this idea that capitalism is evil, and so therefore he was hoping to destroy the system through his muckraking. Who were the muckrakers overall, aside from, well, not muckrakers, sorry, who were the progressives aside from just muckrakers? Well, progressives were mainly made up of middle-class women. If you remember from reading your other work up until this point, middle-class women, they had greater time on their hands due to improvements in technology, also improvements in wages where their men could work and then they would make enough money that the women wouldn't have to be at a factory or a seamstress or performing odd jobs around. So it gave them more time to go to school, get better educated, and with that education and with those skills that they learned, they started to press forward with greater changes in society. They had free time, so they could get together and organize and discuss, and they could read these books like by Upton Sinclair, or they could read suffragette material and organize and go out and become politically activated. Except they're politically active. One of the reasons why many of them were suffragettes is because while they were politically active, they didn't have a political voice, so it required getting the support of men, and they didn't want to solely rely upon hoping that they could get enough men on board with their ideas. You are also going to have progressive presidents, progressive politicians who are going to arrive on scene, who are also going to make great changes during this time. A few other things is one of the key reforms. Sorry, I'm going to go through some of these a little bit faster, or else this video is going to be 30 minutes, and I know none of you will watch it past about 12 minutes, where I'm close to now. So here's a few things that they are going to do. They're going to focus on federal government reforms. The federal government up until this point, and even slightly past this point, but not much further, it's fairly weak and ineffective, but it was designed to be that way. These women were hoping to use the power of the federal government to bring greater reforms on a national level instead of waiting for it to occur on a state level, because often it would take slower if you had to do it state by state by state. Also, they needed to fix state government because state government often impacted them directly first. So that was one of the biggest things that they realized, is that you couldn't neglect state systems, but you also had to focus on short-term reforms on those in order to improve directly society. And there's going to be, of course, big, huge moral crusades. These are going to be, of course, temperance, getting rid of alcohol, prohibition eventually, and then, of course, improving women's roles. Here's kind of the key ones I want you to remember from political changes, okay? First and foremost, they wanted to move to a direct primary system. This prevented from political boss from picking the candidates. They actually had the voters who would show up and they would pick their candidates. We use this today, direct primaries. If you are not part of a political party, you may need to check the area that you're part of. That will determine if you are able to be involved in the primary or not. You may have to be part of a political party in order to engage in direct primary activity, okay? I always encourage everybody to go vote. Do so. Initiatives are become very important because this bypasses the political system and allows the people directly to promote laws and agendas. This allows for them to be able to get enough signatures together to actually make changes immediately. Referendums are really interesting because this gives people the ability to say to their legislators, we reject your bills, or we approve those bills, we would like them to proceed forward. And lastly, recalls. Recalls are state by state. Not all states have them, some states do. We've seen some recalls that have actually occurred over the last year, especially over in California, which has a very active recall system. It's basically if a politician during their term of service is shown to be ineffective, or the voters have lost confidence in them, then they have the right and the ability to vote them out of office and elect a new person to replace them. Recall provisions are pretty interesting. I find them a highly effective way to keep politicians from not breaking their promises. The 17th Amendment, it's going to fundamentally change the Constitution as to how senators worked. Senators originally were picked by state legislatures as to represent state interests. However, progressives saw that the position had become corrupt. They didn't believe they had a voice in it, and that senators were not representing their views. They weren't designed to. They were designed to replace the actual state's views themselves. So that becomes a big thing on that front. So they changed this up, and now even today we do the direct election of senators. That is not going to change. Moving on, we're going to talk about like the commission system. The commission system was designed to ensure that we had people appointed into city governments that were actually effective in their job and were knowledgeable. No longer were you bringing in your friends and your cousins and your buddies into office in order to run it. Now you're going to actually appoint people who have experience, maybe education, so that they can more effectively run the government. We have these today. So if you see like a police commissioner, fire commissioner, you have these people who have done the job usually for a long time and then have been appointed by the state government or the city government in order to continue to effectively run those services. Many cities now use city managers, whereas you used to rely upon the mayor to run the city itself or to appoint those in positions of power. Instead, now we hire people who are experts in city management. And then the mayor and the city council passes laws, creates departments, and the city manager just manages them. He's basically like the CEO of the city government itself. You're going to see social justice during this time. This is a term that we are going to frequently use in today's society also, but it really is born out of the progressive movement. So we're going to see individuals who want to finally eradicate child labor, who want to bring greater civil rights to the African American communities, to give women the right to vote, and also women greater control over finances and their status as legal citizens in this country. Often they were subjected to being under their husband's control, and they couldn't inherit property in some cases, or they had to give all the wages they earned to their husbands. So they want greater autonomy. And of course the poor. Big ones that they push for, though, of course, we're going to kind of go through these quick. I know, I'm sorry, I'm pretty far over here, but I want to make sure I cover some of these. There's going to be a massive reform for child labor. So like Lewis Hines, he would go out and he would take pictures, just like our other individuals we were talking about. He'd take pictures of kids in like the coal mines, faces all blackened. Also, the National Child Labor Committee, they sought to completely ban child labor up to the age of 14 because they knew that they were paying children less. They often knew that they were putting them in very dangerous situations. Often, like if they were in a mine, they'd be sent into like little tiny holes and place the dynamite in there where a grown man couldn't. So they were often placed or put into like machinery to grab stuff out of machines that might still be active because they were small. These all were very dangerous things, and they wanted to get rid of them. The Keaton-Owen Fair Labor Standards pretty much ends child labor even to this day. For the most part, in order to work in this country, aside from being on a farm, you have to be 14 years old. Factories were horrible, dangerous places. The thing is that they reform factories. That's why we have, like today, we have OSHA, the Occupation Safety Health Administration. The protect workers, there were for a long time was not just standardized protection. That's why if you go into a factory today, you have to wear like helmets, hearing protection, eye protection. If you go into blast furnace areas, you have to wear like heat suits. None of this stuff was around back when these people were working these areas. It was highly dangerous, and many people got hurt. And this also starts to put forth the ideas of why was organized labor even needed. This was to put into place systems such as financial compensation if you get hurt on the job, so you're just not left homeless. Also, you could retire after a certain amount of time. One of the big things that brings worker safety to a high point for many Americans was what we call the Triangle Shirt Factory fire. Basically, a large number of women were working in this building, and they were basically making shirts. Now, the building itself was fairly unsafe. It didn't have really fire escapes for the most part, and the owners themselves were obsessed with preventing theft. So they locked the doors for anywhere that would, aside from one key entry and exit point. So as they were leaving one night, somebody casually, what inspections have later found out, threw a cigarette into like a bin of waste and it caught fire. And the fire grew out of control quickly. For the most part, you had one of two options because they're all trying to push for one exit, which was the door. People were crushed and killed in front of the door. But eventually, many people took to trying to escape any way they could. And instead of being burned to death, many young women leapt out of the buildings to their death below. People were writing about stories of seeing it, and there was numerous news stories about eyewitness accounts of the horrors of watching these young women fall from the windows. And this really reshaped America's view on how do we make our workplaces safe for people that work inside of them. So the Triangle Shirt Factory fire brings that to a head. Also, we talked about prohibition. Americans were drinking way too much. They really were. Men were drinking excessively. They were drinking when they were at work. They drank when they came home. They drank all weekend. They were constantly in a state of inebriation. It was unsafe where they were working at, and often if you are a continuous alcoholic and suffer from these issues, usually it leads to temper issues too. Eventually, women push for what's called prohibition. You have Carrie Nation, who used to storm into bars with her little hatchet, as you see right there, but her and her cohorts would break into bars and smash them to pieces in order to try to prevent men from drinking and wasting all their work wages on alcohol and instead focus back on their families. Their level eventually was successful to the point that we do get the 18th Amendment, which bans alcohol outright in the United States. In fact, some of the ways they started prohibition was small. They focused on like counties and created what are known as dry counties where you can't drink in them. Some of those dry counties still exist today. There's still some places in the United States that you can't buy alcohol in because it's a dry county and there isn't a bar in there. But overall, this is like the early portions of the progressive movement. We're going to look at progressive presidents coming up here in our next lecture.